going to speak about TEKS objective number 10, which is the influences of significant individuals in the 20th century. And the terms that you see on the screen are those that will be referenced throughout my talk. The first person that I'm going to discuss is Woodrow Wilson. He was the President of the United States from 1913 to 1921, and he served 2 terms. And his terms overlapped with World War I, and World War I is also called the Great War. During that war, 10 million soldiers were killed, and 21 million soldiers were wounded. And World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918. Wilson was instrumental in international relations, and we'll talk a bit about that when we get to the Treaty of Versailles. And he was also instrumental with the progressive movement, which was from 1901 to 1917, and the movement was in response to corporate and political abuses that were practiced during the turn of the 20th century. During the war, Wilson preferred that the United States remain neutral, but eventually he supported the United States being involved in the war and declared war on Germany in 1917 after German submarines launched attacks on American merchant ships. Around this time, America also learned of the Zimmerman telegram, which was a telegram that Germany sent to Mexico asking them to join with them to fight against America, and Mexico rejected this request. In World War I, there were 2 sides. There were the Allied powers, who were the American allies, and those included Russia, Britain, and France, and the Central powers, who were basically the enemies of the Allied powers, and they were Germany, Austro-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey. And what you see on your screen right now are the flags of those powers. On November 11th, 1918, Germany was exhausted and agreed to an armistice, which was a truce. And in response to that, the request for a truce, the Treaty of Versailles was developed. And President Wilson was instrumental in international politics by helping to negotiate the treaty that was signed at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. It included a plan for the League of Nations, which was an organization that would arbitrate international disputes in hopes of preventing future wars. Wilson presented his 14 points in a speech to Congress in 1918, but Congress did not approve of the United States being a part of the League at that time. Germany had consequences for their part in World War I with the Treaty of Versailles. They were required to pay the equivalent of $33 billion in reparations for World War I, and their final payment of $94 million was made as recently as 2010. Germany also lost more than 10% of their territory and population and all of their overseas colonies. Several progressive reforms took place under Wilson's administrations. One is the Underwood-Simmons Act of 1913, and that act encouraged international trade by reducing tariffs on imports, and it called for the creation of a federal income tax. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created to regulate U.S. money supplies and banks, and to also provide and maintain the country's financial and monetary system. The Federal Trade Commission was organized to investigate and prohibit unfair business practices, and child labor laws were established. The 8-hour workday for railroad workers was established. Federal loans to farmers became a reality. The first Jewish Supreme Court justice was confirmed, and that was Louis Brandeis. In addition, the 18th Constitutional Amendment prohibiting alcohol was established under Wilson's administration. The 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote was established, and the 20th Amendment that moved the beginning and ending terms of the President and Vice President from March 4th to January 20th was also established. When considering Wilson's contributions as President, as a person involved in international relations, such as someone who drafted a document as important as the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, and as someone who was heavily involved in making a mark of progressive reform in our history as Americans as well as the world, it is easy to see why he is deemed one of the most influential people of the 20th century. The next person I would like to introduce is Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 1945, and again from 1951 to 1955. Churchill is most remembered for leading Britain and encouraging his nation to stand against what appeared to be an undefeatable war against the Nazi military during World War II. And World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945. In May 1940, Germany invaded Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. And at first Britain thought that the war would only consist of France and Belgium fighting against Germany, with some help from the British Navy and the British Army, soldiers that were stationed in Europe. But eventually France and Belgium's attempts to defeat Germany looked unpromising. So Churchill decided to rescue these troops in what has become known as the Miracle of Dunkirk. In June of that same year, the French and German governments agreed to an armistice, and this resulted in northern France becoming German military occupied, and the southern part of France being ruled by the French. Basically, this meant that France had fallen. By May 1940 through June 1941 were critical months for Britain because they fought against Germany without help from any other nation. Throughout the war, Britain was constantly challenged, and Churchill continuously raised the spirits of his nation's people and the troops through very powerful and encouraging and inspiring speeches that he gave in the House of Commons and on the radio. Throughout the war, Churchill asked Roosevelt, the American president, for help, but Roosevelt wanted to basically stay out of the war and provide support sort of behind the scenes. But on December 11th, they declared war after an attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. So by December 11th, 1941, America declares war against Germany, and Britain and America joined forces as allies to fight against the communists that were trying to take over the British island. On May 8, 1945, Britain saw victory, and they saw this when Germany surrendered and when Adolf Hitler, the German Nazi ruler, committed suicide. Churchill's leadership of Britain through the country's toughest time in history is definitely worth noting, and definitely makes him a person to be noted as influential during the 20th century.